Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another lesson of Kitāb al Hujjat ala Ahl al Madīnah. Today is lesson 22, and today we are going to be exploring another discussion on Witr, and that is in respect to whether you are required to make up for it if you had missed it or not. Last week we had the opportunity to go over the discussion of whether Witr is going to be a 3 rakat prayer or a 1 rakat prayer. We looked at the different viewpoints. We looked at the evidences that are relied upon by each party, and we had concluded that when it comes to Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi's stance on this issue, it is pretty consistent with the practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum ajma'een. Today, inshallah, we're going to be looking at the next issue which we just introduced, and that is, if you have forgotten to perform your Witr prayer, are you going to be required to make up for it? Now, this is an issue that has been debated over the ages, and it is based on whether the Witr prayer is a mandatory prayer or is it an optional prayer. And if it is optional, then what level does it hold? Is it sunnah? Is it not sunnah? So these are the different viewpoints you're going to see in respect to the Witr prayer. What is important to understand is that when it comes to the position of a ritual, it is all going to be based on the source it has been derived from. So now when it comes to the 5 prayers, the 5 prayers are derived from the mass transmission narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is also a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, which He has repeated approximately 70 times in the Quran to perform salah. So that is now going to be considered a mandatory duty. It's going to be a duty on each Muslim because the command is coming from a decisive source. It's coming from the Quran that is decisive. It's coming from the mass transmission ahadith, which is also decisive. In Arabic, you call this qat'i. When it comes to the Witr prayer, it is a prayer that is definitely being introduced at a latter time. It has been added, and it has also been ordered by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to perform. So when we see an order coming from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, however, it is coming through the non-mass transmission chains. So this would be the single narration chains, which we call ahad. Then in practice, Witr is going to be no different than a farad prayer in practice. However, when it comes to position definitely is going to vary. The most that we can classify this particular ritual as is wajib. In other words, it's also mandatory, but it's coming from a source that is not as strong as the decisive text sources, which we call qat'i. This would technically be called dhanni. Okay, so a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that comes through narrations that are considered single transmissions, ahad transmissions, then you will classify that command as wajib. You must practice it. However, you cannot place it at the position of farad, which means that if a person goes ahead and rejects it, they are not going to exit the fold of Islam. However, when it comes to a farad prayer, any command that is going to be issued through the decisive text, such as the Quran and the mass transmission ahadith, in that case, the command is going to be classified as farad, which you do have to practice, no different than a wajib. However, if a person was to go ahead and reject this, then that would eliminate them from Islam. That's the difference between the two. Once you've understood this, that Witr is a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, it's being transmitted through the single transmission ahadith. So therefore, it places Witr in the wajib position, which means I must practice it. It is a duty. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah then goes ahead and shares his viewpoint on the question that was posed earlier on, and that is, are you required to make up for it if you missed it? So Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi, he writes on this, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وقال أبو حنيفة رحمه الله في الوتر إن نسيه رجل قضاه كما يقضي صلاة ينساها من الصلوات الخمس وإن مضى لذلك أيام. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi says, according to Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi, so he says in respect to witr that if a person forgets it, he will make up for it just like he would make up for a prayer out of the 5 prayers which he had forgotten, even if many days have passed. وَإِن مَضَى لِذَلِكَ أَيَّامٍ. So even if many days have passed, a person is going to be required to make up for witr, because witr and the 5 prayers in practice, they are both a duty. So just like when it comes to a farad prayer, if a person was to miss it, they are required to make up for it. Witr is no different. Witr is also required to be made up for because it is mandatory, although coming from a lesser source. That's Abu Hanifa rahmatullah's position on this. The scholars of Medina say, according to Imam Muhammad, يَقْضِي الْوِتْرَ مَا لَمْ يُصَلِّ الْفَجْرَ فَإِذَا صَلَّيْتَ الصُّبْحَ فَلَا وِتْرَ. So the scholars of Medina, they state that a person is going to make up for the witr as long as they have not performed Fajr, which means that Isha time is finished, Fajr has started, the time of Fajr has started. However, a person has not performed Fajr as yet. So once this person has entered into Fajr time, they have now officially missed the time to perform witr, which now begs the question, are you allowed to make up for it in Fajr time? And the scholars of Medina say yes, as long as you do not perform Fajr. Once you have performed Fajr, fala witr. Now you cannot make up for that witr. That's a lost prayer, and there's nothing that you can do to make up for it, with the exception of tawbah and istighfar. Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi then points out that this is a current view. At the time of him writing this, he's saying that's the current view of the scholars of Medina. They did have a former view. What was that former view? He says, وَقَدْ كَانُوا قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ يَقُولُونَ بِقَضَاءِ الْوِتْرِ مَا لَمْ تَزُلِ الشَّمْسُ. Before this, they were of the view that a person is going to be required to make up for the witr prayer as long as the sun does not move from its meridian, which means dhuhr time. Okay, when the sun hits a meridian, that's pretty much the makruh time. That's the time that you are not allowed to perform any prayers, and the moment it passes that point, dhuhr starts. And they're saying that until that point, you are allowed to perform the witr prayer if you missed it the previous night. That's their former stance. Imam Muhammad rahmatullah is saying, ثُمَّ رَجَعُوا عَنْ ذَلِكَ. Then they had retracted that stance, and then they adopted this stance of يَقْضِي الْوِتْرَ مَا لَمْ يُصَلِّ الْفَجْرَ. A person is going to make up for the witr prayer as long as they have not performed Fajr. And among the people who had shared this stance was Malik bin Anas and those people who would be adopting his viewpoints, in other words, his followers. So Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi wants to point out that when it comes to the scholars of Medina, they've pretty much changed their stance. Before they said that when it comes to the witr prayer, if you have missed it the night before, you can make up for it until dhuhr time. And then they reduced that and they said, well, you can make up for it until you perform Fajr, even though the time of Fajr has begun. Imam Muhammad rahmatullah wants to show here that when it comes to these viewpoints, they're not really consistent with the viewpoints of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, because they said something otherwise. And if you're going to add restrictions and time frames as to when you are allowed to perform the witr, it has to be based on evidence. It cannot be arbitrary. You cannot go and just fix a time frame for it. A time frame must be sourced from something. And Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi, in order to go ahead and support the view of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi, he presents a list of athar. Athar is a plural of athar, and athar means a non-prophetic report. So this is a report of the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, and so forth. So Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi has got a whole list here, and out of that list, I only want to share 3 today, inshallah. The first is the athar, the report of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma. Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi writes, أخبرنا مسعر بن كدام عن وبرة بن عبد الرحمن قال قلت لابن عمر أوتر بعد الفجر قال أرأيت لو لم تصلي الفجر حتى تطلع الشمس أكنت تصليها قال قلت فمه فقال فمه. So he says that Mis'ar bin Qudam reported from Wabra bin Abdurrahman, who said, I asked Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, should I perform witr after Fajr? And Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhuma, instead of giving him a yes-no answer, he wanted him to understand that what witr is equated to. And whatever it is equated to, whatever that thing, whatever ruling that thing holds, it will be applied to witr as well. So he asks the question that, what is your view if you had not performed Fajr until the sun had risen? Would you go ahead and perform Fajr? Meaning that you missed Fajr, sunrise has already taken place, and now you've got to make up for Fajr. Are you going to go ahead and make up for it? The individual, Wabra bin Abdurrahman, said, Famah, of course I would make up for it. So Imam or Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu answered the same. Famah, well, of course you have to make up for witr. Same thing. So from this, what you're seeing is Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhuma, the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, put the witr prayer and the 5 daily prayers on the same playing field, right, at an equal level when it comes to practice. Okay, in terms of practice, it pretty much is the same as the 5 daily prayers. It is a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So therefore, if you're going to make up for the other prayers of the day, if you had missed them, then you would do the same for witr. Okay, because in practice they are no different. So, and that pretty much is the stance of Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi. Right? His stance is based on what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in have ruled. So that's the first author I wanted to share in respect to this. The second author goes back to Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh. Let's look at this. Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi says, أخبرنا قيس بن ربيع الأسدي قال أخبرنا نعيم بن حكيم عن أبي مريم قال شهدت علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه فأتاه رجل فسأله عن رجل نام عن الوتر أو نسي الوتر حتى تطلع الشمس قال من نام أو نسي ولم يوتر فليوتر متى ذكر فليوتر متى ذكر. So Imam Muhammad rahmatullah reports with his transmission chain from Qais bin Rabi' al-Asadi, who reports from Nu'aym bin Hakim, who reports from Abu Maryam, who says, I saw Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh when a man approached him and asked him about an individual who pretty much he sleeps through the witr prayer, or what he has done, he has slept and missed the witr prayer, or he had forgotten the witr prayer until the sun had risen. So you have an individual that went to sleep, couldn't get up on time, and missed his tahajjud, missed his witr, and Fajr had begun. Okay? Or he had actually forgotten to perform witr altogether, and the sun has risen. Okay, so Fajr has already been done, sun has risen. Is this person now going to be required to make up for the witr prayer that he missed? Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh said in very clear words, Man nama aw nasiya. Okay, so whoever is now going to sleep and miss witr as a result, or has forgotten to perform witr altogether, walam yutir, they did not perform witr, falyutir mata dhakar. They should perform the witr prayer whenever they recall or whenever they remember. So if a person had slept through the time, and was not able to perform the witr prayer, whenever they do recall that, yes, I have a witr prayer that is outstanding, they are going to make up for it. And the same is applicable to a person that had gone ahead and forgotten to perform the witr prayer altogether. So you're seeing now Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhuma, and on the other hand Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anh, okay, two giants of knowledge pretty much saying the same thing. That when it comes to witr prayer, number one, there are no time restrictions as to when you must make it up by. And the second thing is that, yes, you must make up for it. This is not something that is going to be contested. Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi then concludes, or we will conclude today's lesson with this one narration where he shares that there are a number, not just a few, there are a number of great tabi'un amongst the scholarly class who pretty much are echoing what Abdullah bin Umar and Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu have said. And therefore Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh is saying nothing different. He's only echoing what they have already said before him. Okay, so it's not based on qiyas, it's not based on analogy, it's not based on his own conjecture, it is based on fatwas from the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. So, in respect to this, Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi says, أخبرنا إسماعيل بن عياش قال حدثني ليث بن أبي سليم قال سمعت عطاء وطاووسا ومجاهدا والحسن البصري وسعيد بن جبير يقولون في رجل نسي الوتر أو نام عنه ليوتر وإن أدركه مطلع الشمس. Okay, so Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi is now sharing a narration that goes back to Layth bin Abi Sulaym, who says, I have heard Ata bin Abi Rabah, Taus, Mujahid bin Jabr, Hassan al-Basri, Sa'id ibn Jubair. All of these are great scholars of the time. One thing that's common in pretty much all of them, they all were the students of Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma. Some of them were the students of Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhuma. So he's saying that all of these great tabi'un, and those of us who now take up the line of Islamic studies, these names are not going to be foreign names to you. These are names that come up all the time. Ata bin Abi Rabah, Ta'us, Mujahid bin Jabr, Hassan al-Basri, Sa'id ibn Jubair. All of these people are saying one thing. That is, when a person misses witr, when a person forgets to perform witr, or they had gone ahead and slept through its time and could not perform it, then they should perform the witr prayer even if the sunrise has reached them, even if the sun has risen. وَإِنْ أَدْرَكَهُ مَطْلَعُ الشَّمْسِ. So they're saying nothing different than what Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu had said. And that pretty much then leads us to the conclusion that when it comes to Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi stands on this issue, there's two things. Number one, are you required to make up for it? We see from the fatwa of Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu, Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and the great students of the Sahaba, that they are all in consensus that yes, witr must be made up for if it has been missed. The second thing is, if you are going to make up for it, how much time do you have to make up for it? And pretty much the consistent answer from all of them is that there are no time restrictions. You must perform it whenever you do recall it, whenever you do remember it. So that pretty much is the conclusion of this discussion today. Inshallah, we'll cover one more aspect of witr next week, inshallah, when we do have this lesson. And hopefully that will be able to give us more clarity on the different issues surrounding the witr prayer. Until next week, inshallah, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make everything easy for all of you and grant you afiyah. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.